They get a new government, but a massive civil war strikes up in the eastern part of Ukraine, which, by the way, the eastern part of Ukraine is pro-Russian. So they are trying to pull away and secede. Crimea, it's in 2014. Crimea was not officially a part of Ukraine. Some people say it was, some people say it wasn't. There's a lot of stuff that goes back. Russia claims that, when Crimea was given to Ukraine, it was illegal. Then you have a lot of stuff. But there is a fact. The fact is that Russia has had soldiers in Crimea forever. Sevastopol is home to the Black Fleet. The other thing is that they didn't invade Crimea. Crimea asked to be annexed by Russia. And when they held a vote, 95% of the people living in Crimea that voted in support of joining Russia. Those numbers aren't coming from Russia. Those numbers are actually coming from United States entities that ran the polls and got the data. A legitimate 95% of Crimeans wanted to join Russia. So this kind of goes back, though. Why would we keep saying, well, why? They're saying it's an invasion. And remember, this is 2014. You know what else happened in 2014? So they just get rid of Viktor Yanukovych, and the U.S. basically implements the government that they want. Rosemont Seneca, who is Hunter Biden's business, that he started with Devon Archer and Christopher Hines, who's John Kerry's stepson, and Devon Archer was a senior political advisor on John Kerry's presidential campaign, by the way. He's in jail for securities fraud and conspiracy. But Christopher Hines and Hunter Biden aren't. They started Rosemont Seneca. They go over and they start investing in businesses. The businesses they invest in, CH2M, Hill, Metabiota, Black & Veatch, all of them are the ones that are doing the operations at the Biolabs in Ukraine. This is a government contract, an official government contract. Issued July 28th, 2021, just last year. It's for $3.6 million, and they are looking for an entity to go over to Ukraine and basically clean up these biolabs and continue work that CH2M Hill was doing. They state, quote, this is the government stating this just last year, that there was a substantial risk that the Ukrainian government was going to start operating these labs, which had a license to work with the most dangerous pathogens, the highest level of pathogens there are, without any approval or any oversight from any foreign regulator. So they needed someone to go in there and make sure that they were going to, do it the right way. Obviously, Russia sees this. But this is a real contract. These labs exist. Anyone that's denying that this stuff's not going on, it is. And the Bidens have a hand in it. Rosemont Seneca actually themselves stated the relationship between these companies and said that they were financial backers to them and listed these companies out on their website. CH2M Hill is kind of like it evolved to CH2M Hill. It was Hill International, who was owned by one of Biden's friends. Hillstone International is a subsidiary of Hill International. Hillstone International got government contracts with no experience to go and start rebuilding buildings and construction progress in Iraq after the war. Joe Biden's brother, with no construction past, was the vice president of Hillstone International. So it's a big circle here. Hunter Biden also sat on the board of Burisma. So did Devon Archer. Burisma is the largest energy company in Ukraine. Burisma was started in 2002. In 2006, it consolidated, but one of the businesses that it consolidated with was, let me see if I can find it, it's the Sunrise Energy Resources. Sunrise Energy Resources was started in 1991 following the collapse of the Soviet Union. The timing of this is it's just crazy. No experience at all, no operations at all. But their agenda was to go and do developmental gas and gas production in Ukraine, also with exploratory stuff as well in Ukraine. In 2004, they finally get a license following the presidential election overthrow there. They finally get a license, and in 2005, they start doing operations in Ukraine. Again, 2005 is that Nunn-Lugar Act, when they repealed all the restrictions and allowed these businesses to go over from the U.S. and start making money. These businesses are funded by the OPIC, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. It's a government entity, and the OPIC provides these American businesses with guaranteed loans, but also gives them political risk insurance. Political risk insurance in countries that are already politically risky. It is no differently, what the OPIC is doing is no different than a life insurance company approving insurance for a dead guy and then paying the claim because he died. No one does that except our government. And every country that the OPIC was funding and giving insurance to were countries that all either already had a conflict ongoing or very soon after had a conflict. And there's a reason why. So Congo, Afghanistan, Georgia, Ukraine, Venezuela. You have stuff going on in Mexico that's politically risky. There's so many of these other, Egypt, right? All of them had an uprising or some kind of conflict. And all of those conflicts, Libya is another one, by the way. All of these conflicts, are usually tend to come back, and there's theories about the United States being involved in it. Well, when you get a claim on this insurance, you don't report it as income, and it's not taxable. And it's replacing your potential lost revenue for this year, but also for future projections. And that's how these politicians, because these businesses are very politically connected, these politicians are getting a cut of it because there's no one tracking it. Congress is the one that also dictates who's getting this money. They're in the driver's seat to cutting the checks to the businesses that they want to go over there. Why the fuck is a business that started in Delaware, by the way? Sunrise Energy Resources was started in Delaware in 1991. Kind of a coincidence. No experience, and we're going to give them loans and political risk insurance to go into a fucking conflict-ridden country where the election just got overthrown by the United States, basically, and allow them to start doing oil operations. Well, when Crimea was annexed, Burisma had subsidiaries in Crimea that basically controlled all of the energy production in Crimea. When it was annexed, those operations halted. Russia halted those operations. Now you know why the United States is calling it an invasion of Crimea when it wasn't. There were no shots fired, nothing. It was not an invasion. They're calling it that, though, because of money. They lost money because their operations were cut off. Now you have this civil war going on that breaks out, and it becomes a bad civil war. The Ukraine actually deploys its military into this region, and they are going at it. Over 20,000 people end up dying from this war. And Ukraine was having bombing campaigns with fighter jets, all of that. And the other side wasn't innocent either, because Russia was backing them. It's no different than what we're seeing right now. It just wasn't actually Russia involved at that point directly. So they end up having a ceasefire agreement in Minsk. This is the Minsk agreements. In 2017, after the Minsk agreements, Ukraine puts it in their constitution that they're going to join NATO. In 2019, Zelenskyy signs off on a new security agreement that kind of solidifies stronger ties with the United States and also reaffirms that Ukraine is going to join NATO. Now, the question is, well, why didn't Putin invade then? You have two reasons, I think. Now, some people may not like my first answer, but Trump was elected in 2016. I think Putin knew what he was getting with other politicians that had been in the industry for 40 years. The Bidens, the Obamas, the Clintons, all that. He expected. Trump was an outsider and very unpredictable. I believe Trump also told him that if he went into Ukraine, he was going to bomb Moscow. I don't know how true that is, but I think it just got Putin thinking that he didn't want to deal with an unpredictable person. I also think that in 2020, we had COVID. And the pandemic probably delayed any invasion that was going to end up taking place. But Putin has been wide open on his opinion on NATO expansion. And he does not want a NATO country on his border, even though they do on the northwest border now with the Baltic states. But he did not want Ukraine, especially because that gives up another warm water port. But he doesn't want the United States putting military establishments in Ukraine right on Russia's borders and having missiles right on Russia's borders. He also knows that the Russian military is far inferior to NATO, and that any confrontation between the two would ultimately have to be defended with nuclear weapons from Russia. He's said this. He's said this for a while now. So, there's a lot of speculation there, but I think that a lot of the United States interests in this region were actually genuine at the beginning with the Wolfowitz Doctrine and what they were trying to do. I can completely understand what the United States was trying to achieve. And when you read the Russian defense strategy, it makes it even more understandable on why the tensions with Russia never were cured. But I think that those interests have long evolved since 1992. And I think now the U.S. interests are more of a financial and business interest, not for the U.S. economy, not for the U.S. citizens, but for the people that are making these decisions, the politicians that are going and getting a cut of all of these businesses over in these regions. There's too much evidence, there's too much that supports their financial dealings in these nations, and I think it's a shame, honestly. Because I think that maybe some of this conflict wasn't going to be avoided, but we probably didn't need to be involved at all, and I think we definitely put gas on the fire. And not to mention, it's illegal for what the politicians are doing. It's highly illegal. Because they're not acting in our best interest anymore. They're acting in their own best interest, which is the exact opposite of how it's supposed to be. They're serving us, not themselves. So that's kind of a good overview. I'm going to probably end up doing another video going more in depth on the whole business side of this and the economic stuff that went on in the early 90s between Russia and Ukraine and then other areas of the world as well. But this is really important to know because you're not going to hear this from the mainstream media. You're not going to hear that the U.S. backed these protests, that we are a large part in all of this conflict, and Russia is actually just going and abiding by their own defense strategy that they wrote 30 years ago. And the United States would do the same thing. The other thing, just recently, yesterday, they uncovered the mass graves. I can't remember the city's name. It was like 410 Ukrainian civilians that were killed. Some of them tortured, some of them executed. They're blaming it on Russian soldiers. I was listening to the UN meeting today, and I was listening to the Russian representative talk. I'll say this. Don't jump to conclusions, especially given the history of opposition and protest and how those were artificially created to achieve a goal. Do not jump to conclusions on who did this human rights violation. Because our president, Biden, just last week was calling for regime change. Whether the White House says it or not, he, quote, said, Putin cannot remain in power. He's long accused Putin of being a war criminal. And all of a sudden now we have this these killings, this murder situation, and they are now calling for Putin to be brought up on charges in trial. So do not think for a second that we wouldn't back up Biden's claims and trying to, force a regime change, but doing it in a legal sense and bringing him up on trial and prosecuting him for what he's done in Ukraine. So just, again, take everything with a grain of salt. Keep an open mind. Just understand that this is a big gray area, and there's two sides to every situation. So if you like the video, hit subscribe. We're going to do more, and be sure to check us out. Real Conservative Talk. We're usually on every day at 6 Central. Thank you.